I packed my entire life and vanished after my wife mocked my job loss at a company party while everyone laughed. A decade later, I'm back as the owner of the company she works for. A room full of coworkers, friends, managers, some trying not to laugh, others embracing the awkwardness and chuckling anyway. I stood there, my face hot, staring at the floor. My wife, Delia, was smiling like she had just delivered a stand-up routine. A company holiday party was probably the last place I expected my dignity to unravel. But there it was, slipping through my fingers with each snide chuckle. No one defended me. No one said, "Hey, that's enough." I just stood there, freshly unemployed, publicly humiliated, and realizing that the person who should have had my back just stabbed me in it, for a laugh. That night changed everything. But not in the dramatic, flipping tables kind of way. It was quieter than that. More surgical. When we got home, she acted like nothing had happened. Made tea. Turned on the TV. I watched her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the woman in my living room anymore. I didn't yell. I didn't even tell her I was leaving. Around 3 a.m., while she was asleep, I packed 2 bags, took my laptop and savings, and left. She didn't call. Not that day, not the next. I didn't either. Maybe we both knew it was over. Maybe she figured I'd crawl back. But I didn't. I drifted for a while, lived out of my car for a bit, took whatever jobs I could find, stocking shelves, unloading freight, even washing dishes at a 24-hour diner in Des Moines. It was humiliating, exhausting, but also clarifying. No one expected anything from me. No one judged. I became invisible, and in a strange way, that gave me peace. Eventually, I landed in Seattle. A college buddy, Owen, let me crash on his couch. He'd just started a tech company focused on supply chain optimization. He needed someone with my background, logistics, data analytics, process improvement. It was a long shot, but I threw myself into it. Those early days were BR Tao. We were broke, overworked, and one bug away from collapse. But we believed in it. More importantly, I had something to prove, not to Delia, not to anyone else, but to myself. The company, Rhombic Solutions, grew. Slowly at first, then all at once. Within a few years, we were being approached by venture capitalists, industry leaders, potential buyers. We took a partial buyout, which gave us enough capital to expand. I cashed out some shares and used that money to start my own logistics firm, Falcon Dynamics. This time, it was mine. All mine. 10 years after I walked out of that apartment in Chicago, I walked back into the offices of the very company that once laid me off. They were hemorrhaging money, leadership was a disaster, and they were desperate. I acquired them quietly through a series of holding companies. No one knew who the buyer was until the paperwork was signed. I didn't even realize Delia still worked there, until I saw her. She was sitting in a conference room, leading a presentation, her tone sharp, her eyes dulled by routine. I stood outside the glass wall, watching her for a moment. She hadn't changed much. Maybe a few more lines around the eyes, a little wear in her posture, but otherwise, the same. She didn't see me. Not then. Later that week, I called for a department review and had her team attend. I watched her reaction as she stepped into the boardroom and saw me at the head of the table. "Malcolm?" she said, frozen in place. I didn't say much. Just nodded. Let her sit. We went through the meeting like professionals. Her voice trembled once, maybe twice, but she kept it together. Afterwards, she approached me in the hallway. I didn't know. "How are you even? I own the company now," I said plainly. She didn't know what to say. Her lips parted, then closed again. I waited. "Can we talk?" she finally asked. I agreed. Not for her, but for me. I needed to hear what she'd say, needed to see her eyes when she explained what she did. We met in my office the next morning. She looked like she hadn't slept. No makeup, hair pulled back, eyes red. "I was awful to you," she said without prompting. I've thought about that night a million times. I was trying to be funny, to deflect. "I didn't know you were going to leave. You didn't call," I reminded her. "I thought you'd come back." I nodded. Let the silence stretch. "I'm sorry," she said, tears welling up now. "You didn't deserve that." It was strange. I had imagined this conversation so many times over the years. In most versions, I'd yell, curse, throw her humiliation back in her face. But now, all I felt was distance. Not hate. Just nothing. "I'm not here for revenge," I told her. "You'll get a fair chance, like everyone else. But that's all it will be." She nodded. "I understand." She left quietly. No dramatic goodbyes, no awkward send-off from coworkers. Just a final click of her heels on the linoleum floor and the soft swoosh of the glass door closing behind her. After she was gone, there was a strange stillness in the office. I remember sitting alone in the executive conference room where I first saw her again, watching the city lights blink on across Chicago through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The weight of a decade's worth of change settled in my chest. I had come full circle, but not in the way revenge fantasies play out in movies. There was no moment of triumph, no feeling of conquest, just silence. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't feel satisfied or vindicated. I felt empty, not in a despairing way. More like I'd been running a race for years only to cross the finish line and realize I didn't remember why I started running in the first place. What do you do when you finally get what you thought you wanted, and it doesn't feel the way you imagined? Delia's departure became a footnote in the company's day-to-day operations. HR handled her exit. Her name popped up in the offboarding report, and then it was gone. The office carried on. I buried myself in work. That was my instinct: build more, grow faster, reach further. Expansion projects, strategic partnerships, aggressive hiring. I was in meetings from dawn to dusk, rarely leaving the office before 9 p.m. But even surrounded by success, I felt strangely peripheral, like I'd built this massive machine and was now just a cog in it. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Wednesday, buried in a stack of mail I normally wouldn't even touch. My assistant had left it on my desk with a sticky note. Personal. No return address. I almost threw it away, assuming it was fan mail or some random appeal. But something about it made me open it. It was from Delia. It wasn't dramatic or desperate, just honest. She wrote about her life after I left, how she spiraled at first, the divorce, the therapy, the nights she couldn't sleep without thinking about that party. She said she spent years wondering what kind of person laughs at their partner's lowest moment and why she'd become one. She never asked for forgiveness, just clarity. She wrote that seeing me again was both painful and healing, that she didn't expect me to feel anything, but that she wanted me to know she saw now what she couldn't see back then. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down, walked out of my office, and went home early for the first time in months. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, a glass of scotch in hand, watching the red and white lights stretch down Lakeshore Drive. I thought about how much had changed, about the man I used to be, the one who walked into that party thinking his wife would support him, only to be made a joke. I wasn't him anymore, but I wasn't quite sure who I was now either. I had the money, the company, the respect. I'd built a new life from the ground up, but I hadn't let anyone in for 10 years. No serious relationships, no close friendships outside of work. I had mastered isolation so well it felt like second nature. And for the first time, I wondered if that was something I needed to unlearn. The next morning, I took a walk through Millennium Park before work. I hadn't done that in years. It was early spring, just warm enough to forego a coat, the trees just starting to bud. Families were out, couples holding hands, joggers weaving through the paths. I sat on a bench near the bean, watching people move through the world like they had nothing to prove. That's when it hit me. I didn't either. I didn't need to keep proving I was worth something. I had survived, rebuilt, and reclaimed a part of myself that I'd let go of the night she humiliated me. But more importantly, I discovered that revenge isn't about hurting the person who hurt you. It's about healing the part of yourself that let them. I started doing things differently after that. I delegated more, took actual vacations, reconnected with old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. I even started seeing someone, slowly, cautiously, a woman named Juno, who I met through a nonprofit logistics mentoring group I'd sponsored. She wasn't flashy. She didn't care about titles or net worth. We started with coffee, then dinners, then weekend trips to places without cell reception. I didn't tell her about Delia for a long time. Not because I was hiding it, but because for the first time, my past didn't feel like the most interesting thing about me. Still, Delia lingered in the back of my mind, not in a romantic way, but like a faded photograph you find in a drawer and can't bring yourself to throw away. She had been a major chapter in my life, and her absence was just as loud as her presence once was. I never wrote her back, but I kept the letter, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of who I'd been and who I refused to be again. Months passed. Falcon dynamics continued to thrive, but my perspective on it began to shift. It was no longer about growth for the sake of proving a point. It was about meaning. I found myself more invested in mentoring young professionals, creating healthier workplace cultures, offering second chances to people who might have been like me a decade ago, broken, bruised, unsure of their place in the world. I stepped back from the day-to-day operations little by little, promoted a younger VP I trusted to COO, and took on more of a chairman role. Not retired, not uninvolved, just evolved. The kind of man who didn't need to be in every meeting to feel important. One Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing a pitch deck in one of our small lounges when my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in over a year appeared on the screen. Delia. I stared at it for a while. Didn't pick it up. She didn't leave a message. The next day, she called again. This time, I answered. Hi, she said softly. I hope this isn't crossing a boundary. I didn't speak right away. I could hear traffic in the background. She was outside somewhere. Walking, maybe. Nervous. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she continued. I have a question. One I've never been able to ask. I waited. Why didn't you say anything that night? When I made the joke, it caught me off guard. I'd turned that moment over in my head 1,000 times, but never from her perspective. I think part of her hoped I would have called her out, gotten angry, embarrassed her in return. But I didn't. I just walked away. I think I didn't say anything, I replied slowly. because I knew it was over, and saying something would have made me stay longer than I needed to. Silence. Then she said, "That's what hurt the most. That you didn't fight for us." That stung, but not because it was true, because it wasn't. "I did," I said. "Every day before that party." She exhaled. Not a sigh, more like a release. "I just wanted to hear it," she said. "I'm sorry for calling." She hung up before I could say anything more. I didn't feel shaken, just reflective. The wound wasn't open anymore. It was just a scar. That weekend, I drove up to Traverse City. It had become a retreat for me, a place where the lake air reminded me that life didn't have to be moving at 100 miles an hour to feel full. I had a small, minimalist home up there. Nothing flashy, just enough. Juno joined me this time. She'd never been. We made simple meals, sat on the porch in comfortable silence, listened to the birds in the early morning. There was something deeply healing about it. On our second night there, she asked me a question over dinner. "Do you still think about her?" I didn't lie. "Sometimes." She nodded. "Does it hurt?" I thought about it. "Not anymore," I said. "It's like remembering a version of me that doesn't exist anymore." She smiled. Not a jealous smile, not an insecure one. Just understanding. That's what I'd been missing all along. Not just companionship, but understanding. A few weeks later, I got an email from someone in HR asking for my approval to launch a new internal program. Support groups for employees going through personal transitions, divorce, job loss, grief. They called it the turning point. I didn't even hesitate. I approved the funding instantly, because no one had been there for me back then, and now I could be there for others. Still, life had a strange way of circling back. One morning, walking through the building for a routine drop-in, I passed the reception desk and froze. Delia was standing there, older now, but still recognizable. Her posture was different. Softer, maybe. She wasn't wearing the polished power suit look she used to. She looked regular, human. Our eyes met. She looked startled. Then, she smiled. Just a small one. I nodded and kept walking. It wasn't a dramatic encounter. There were no big words exchanged, no slow motion scenes, no music swelling in the background. Just a glance, a nod, and the faint curve of a smile from someone who used to know everything about me and now knew nothing at all. Still, it stayed with me. I found myself thinking about her for the rest of the day, not in a yearning way, but like you'd remember a road you used to take every day but haven't driven in years. I wondered what she was doing there. Visiting someone? Starting a job interview? Closing a chapter? By the next morning, it didn't matter. I had meetings, calls, decisions to make. Life moves forward. But later that week, the front desk notified me there was a visitor who'd left something with them, addressed to me. No name, just a simple envelope. Inside was a short note and a book. The note read, "Not trying to insert myself into your life again. But I read this, and it made me think of you. Of how people change. Of how they don't. Thought you might find something in it. D." The book was The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I'd heard of it. Never read it. It was about trauma, recovery, healing, not just emotional, but physiological. I flipped it open and saw she had underlined a passage in pencil. Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. I sat with that for a while. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel confused. I just felt grateful that she had given that version of herself the space to learn, that she had, in some quiet, private way, sought to understand why she'd become the person who once mocked her own husband in public. Around that same time, I was invited to speak at a leadership summit in San Francisco. Topic: personal resilience in leadership. I hadn't done a lot of public speaking since I started the company. Never liked the spotlight, but something about this felt different. Necessary, even. The night before the keynote, I sat in the hotel lobby and thought about what I was going to say. All the polished, corporate-sounding phrases I'd jotted down felt hollow. That's when it clicked. Maybe the most honest thing I could offer was my story. Not the highlight reel, not the polished resume version. The truth. So I told it. In front of 300 executives, founders, HR directors. I told them about the night I lost my job. About how my wife humiliated me in front of our coworkers. About how I packed up my life and disappeared. How I rebuilt from the bottom with nothing but a cracked laptop and a willingness to start over. How none of the success I eventually found ever erased the pain of that night, or the man I had to leave behind in order to grow. I didn't name names. Didn't air dirty laundry. But I spoke plainly. And when I finished, the room was silent for a beat before the applause began. But more importantly, afterward, in the hall, a woman in her 60s approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "My son went through something like that. I wish he'd heard this 10 years ago." That was the moment I realized something I hadn't before. Your story, no matter how painful, can be someone else's survival manual. Back in Chicago, the rhythm of life softened. Juno and I settled into something that felt solid. We weren't rushing. No ultimatums. Just consistency. She was the kind of person who let you sit in silence without filling it, and those kinds of people are rare. One Sunday morning, we were sitting at a small cafe in Logan Square. She was reading a paper, I was sipping coffee, and a dog tied to a bike rack nearby kept barking every few minutes. It wasn't disruptive, just there, like white noise. Out of nowhere, she looked at me and asked, "Do you ever feel like you're finally inside your life now? Like you used to be watching it happen to someone else, but now you're actually living it?" It hit me like a wave. "Yes," I said, "but it took me a long time to get here." She nodded, didn't ask for more. And that's what I loved about her. She didn't need to excavate every wound to understand it was there. Later that month, I got word that Delia had started working at a nonprofit. Something to do with reentry programs for women coming out of prison. The kind of work that doesn't come with status or six-figure bonuses. It surprised me, but it didn't. She was changing, quietly, away from the eyes that once adored her for her sharp tongue and clever burns. Now, she was building something from humility, not ambition. I respected that. Sometimes growth is loud, launches, promotions, applause. Sometimes it's silent. A handwritten note, a new job in an old neighborhood, a book given with no expectation of response. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't need to. I'd long since let go of the part of me that needed closure to feel whole. The truth is, some stories don't have clear endings. They just fade out. Some people drift away not with slammed doors, but with soft goodbyes you don't even hear until they echo years later. And that's okay. A few months later, I received an invitation to speak at a logistics leadership panel hosted at Northwestern, my old university. The panel featured prominent alumni who had made significant contributions in supply chain and logistics technology. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. Returning to the place where I first began to build the life Delia and I once dreamed of together felt oddly fitting. Full circle moments have a funny way of showing up when you finally stop chasing them. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and business leaders. I was one of the final speakers. The other panelists included a few names I recognized from industry publications. But one stood out, Delia. Apparently, the nonprofit she joined had formed a partnership with one of the university's career development programs. She was now heading a department focused on job placement and training for formerly incarcerated women. She was listed as a panelist representing social impact in logistics. I chuckled when I saw her name in the brochure. Not mockingly, just bemused. 10 years ago, we were both clawing up the corporate ladder. Now, we'd taken drastically different paths, one toward scale and acquisition, the other toward redemption and quiet purpose. We were seated beside each other at the long table up front. She looked at me with a small, hesitant smile. I returned it. "Funny how life circles back," she said under her breath before the moderator kicked things off. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The event was well run. We each spoke about our work, answered student questions, shared our biggest failures and biggest lessons. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up. I could feel every eye on me, including hers. "I lost everything 10 years ago," I said simply. "My job, my sense of identity, my marriage, all in a matter of weeks. And while it was one of the most painful periods of my life, I now see it as the foundation of everything I've built since." A few people nodded. Students scribbled in notebooks. "I'm not here to tell you about success," I continued. "I'm here to tell you that sometimes, when people dismiss you, when they laugh at your downfall or treat you like you're less than, those moments become your fuel. Quiet, patient fuel. And you can burn it for years if you know how." I looked at her briefly. She didn't flinch. She just stared straight ahead. "But here's the real victory," I added. "It's not that I made more money or built a company. The real victory was learning how to outgrow the version of myself that needed to prove anything to anyone." Applause followed. Not thunderous, but sincere. I sat down. She didn't say anything, but I caught her swallowing hard, her hands clasped tight in her lap. After the panel, there was a reception in the courtyard. Students buzzed around with questions, business cards were exchanged, LinkedIn connections made. She found me near the coffee table. "I wasn't expecting you to speak like that," she said softly. "You weren't expecting me to be invited," I corrected, smirking. She gave a half laugh, then shook her head. "No, I wasn't. But I'm glad you were." There was a pause. "You really built something incredible," she added. "I mean, from nothing." I nodded. "You helped, in your own way." She winced slightly at that. "I know." We stood there in silence for a while, surrounded by the clatter of small talk and the hum of music. "You seem happy," she said eventually. "I am." Another pause. She glanced down at her drink. "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "No, I don't think I could have gotten here if you hadn't done what you did. It broke me, but breaking was the only way I could rebuild." She looked like she wanted to say something else, maybe a deeper apology, maybe a plea for forgiveness or redemption. But I didn't give her the chance. Instead, I finished my drink, looked her in the eye, and said, "Take care of yourself, Delia." And then I walked away. A week later, Falcone Dynamics was listed in Crane's Chicago Business as one of the top privately held logistics firms in the Midwest. We'd just landed a massive government contract that would triple our operations over the next year. Her nonprofit? It was among the organizations we'd chosen to partner with, anonymously, for job training grants. I didn't sign the check. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. That was the final act of my revenge. To stand tall. To be better. To do good. Not for applause, not for pride, but because the strongest form of revenge is building a life so powerful and full that it renders your past small and irrelevant. She had taken a shot at me when I was down. I didn't strike back. I just stood up, walked forward, and built a kingdom so tall. She could only look up from the ground where she left me. And now, I don't just have success. I have peace. And that's the best revenge of all.